The storm came at midnight. July 10th, 1856, in the village of Smiljan, a quiet fold of land in what is now Croatia, then part of the Austrian Empire. The sky broke open with lightning. In the middle of that storm, a child was born. The midwife looked at the timing. She looked at the light cracking across the sky. She told the mother this was a bad omen, that a child born in lightning was a child marked for darkness. The mother looked at her son. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, end quote, "He will be a child of light." End quote. She was more right than she could have known. Nikola Tesla grew up to wire the world. The electricity running through every home on Earth, in Lagos, in London, in Lima, flows through a system he designed. The MRI machine that has saved millions of lives runs on principles he first described. The wireless signals bouncing through the air around you right now exist because of mathematics he worked out alone in his head decades before anyone believed him. And he died in a hotel room, alone, with $33 to his name. This is not a story about Thomas Edison. It gets there, but that and Oppos, that's not what this is. This is not a story about failure. Tesla was not a failure. And this is not simply a story about a forgotten genius, because the word in quote, forgotten in quote, lets us off too easy. We didn't end Oppos. Forget Nikola Tesla. We knew exactly who he was. We just chose not to pay attention. This is a story about what it costs to be right. Too early, for too long. There is a moment, one afternoon in the spring of 1888, when Tesla made a single decision that would change the history of technology and cost him almost everything he had. We in Oppos, LL come back to that moment. Hold it. But first, you need to understand where he came from. Because Nikola Tesla was not an accident. He was the product of a woman most history books never mention, in a village most history books never find, shaped by a mind so unusual that the men who worked alongside him, brilliant men, educated men, powerful men, never quite knew what to do with him. He was not eccentric in the casual sense. The word eccentric comes from the Greek ekentros, literally, end quote, out of center, end quote. His rivals used it as an insult. Tesla would have taken it as a compliment. He had been out of center from the beginning. That midnight storm was just the first sign. Part 2, Act 1, Origin Graz Edison 33 images 306 to 858 Memo Duca, The Prodigy Years, Edison and Oppos, S. Betrayal. His mother in Oppos, S. name was Duca, Georgina Mandic Tesla, though history has largely lost her under that last name. She never learned to read. Not because she lacked intelligence, the opposite. Duca Tesla had a mind that retained everything it touched. She memorized entire books of Serbian epic poetry. She invented tools for the household, small mechanical improvements to looms, churns, household implements, because she saw, intuitively, how things could work better. She never wrote any of it down. She had no reason to. The world she lived in had no framework for a woman who invented things. Her son watched all of this and remembered. Tesla and Oppos, his autobiographical memoir, My Inventions, published in 1919, opens with his mother. Not his father, his mother. He wrote that she was, end quote, an inventor of the first order, end quote. He credited her, directly, specifically, for the memory that would later allow him to design entire machines inside his head, rotating them in 3 dimensions, testing them mentally before a single piece of metal was ever cut. He was not exaggerating. Tesla and Oppos' memory was something his contemporaries struggled to describe. He could memorize books after a single reading. He spoke 8 languages. He could visualize a complete mechanical system, gears, coils, tolerances, and run it mentally until he found the flaw. His designs, when they finally reached paper, were almost always correct on the first attempt. The question was always whether the world was ready for what his mind had already built. He arrived at the Graz Polytechnic Institute in Austria in the autumn of 1875. Brilliant, driven, sleeping 4 hours a night. In 1878, in a physics classroom at Graz, a professor named Jacob Poschel demonstrated a piece of equipment called a Gram dynamo. It was a machine that generated electricity. Poschel ran it in reverse, accidentally, and it functioned as a motor. A spark jumped. The machine hummed. Tesla saw something no one else in the room saw. He stood up. He told Poschel that the machine was inefficient, that the commutator, the sparking device that switched the current into Oppo's S direction, was the problem, that there was a way to generate power without any commutator at all. Poschel stopped him in front of the class. He explained, with full academic authority, that what Tesla was describing was a kind of perpetual motion machine. Impossible. A fantasy. He told the class that Tesla may accomplish great things, but he certainly never will do this. Tesla sat back down. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He spent the next 6 years building the thing in his head. By 1882, walking through a Budapest park at sunset, reciting Goethe from memory, Tesla stopped midline. He picked up a stick. He drew the rotating magnetic field in the dirt, the complete diagram of an AC induction motor. The math was right. The physics was right. The machine was real. He had proven Poschel wrong in the dust of a park in Budapest. He just hadn't an Oppo's. He told anyone yet. He needed money. He needed a laboratory. He needed, more than anything, someone who could see what he saw. In 1884, Nikola Tesla boarded a ship for America. He arrived in New York City with 4 cents in his pocket, a book of his own poetry, a scientific paper, and a letter of recommendation to the most famous inventor in the world. The letter was to Thomas Edison. Edison read it. He hired Tesla on the spot. He gave him a desk in a lab at Pearl Street and put him to work improving the DC generators that powered Edison and Oppo's S electrical empire. Here in Oppo's, that's what most people miss about what happened next. Tesla was not Edison and Oppo's S rival in the beginning. He was Edison and Oppo's S employee. He admired him, cautiously, with reservations, but genuinely. He worked 18-hour days. He solved problems Edison and Oppo's S other engineers had given up on. Within months, he had redesigned Edison and Oppo's S generators from the ground up, making them dramatically more efficient. Edison noticed. He called Tesla into his office. He told him the work was excellent. Then he told him that he had promised Tesla $50,000 for the work, and that the $50,000 had been a joke. End quote. Tesla, end quote. Edison said, end quote, "You Don and Oppo's, to understand American humor." End quote. Tesla looked at him. He said nothing. He picked up his coat. He walked out of the building. He never worked for Thomas Edison again. Robert Underwood Johnson described the encounter as a collision between 2 entirely different definitions of what genius was for. Tesla had come to America believing that brilliance was its own currency. Edison had just taught him, brutally efficiently, that in America, the only currency was currency. Tesla was 28 years old. He had no money, no laboratory, no reputation in this country, and a complete AC motor system living fully formed inside his head. A system that no one had yet built, that no one had yet seen, that one professor had publicly called impossible. He was also completely certain he was right. That certainty, that absolute, unshakable certainty, was both the thing that made him extraordinary and the thing that would, in the end, break him. But that comes later. We in Oppo's, not there yet. Part 3. Midpoint CTA, 5 images, 9:18 to 10:21 memo the choice between control and giving away. So here's where we are. A 28-year-old Serbian immigrant, standing on the street outside Thomas Edison and Oppo's S laboratory, with nothing but a mind full of ideas that would, within a decade, make Edison and Oppo's S entire electrical system obsolete. What came next was not a simple rivalry. It was not a fight between 2 stubborn men. It was a collision between 2 visions of the future, one that wanted to control power and one that wanted to give it away. If you haven't an Oppo's subscribed yet, this is the moment. Because what an Oppo's is coming in the next 12 minutes. The war that nearly broke Tesla, the decision that cost him a fortune, and the tower he built that could have changed everything. That an Oppo's. That's worth staying for. And if you have one guess about what that decision was, the one from 1888, drop in the comments. We and Oppos, Re-Getting Close. Part 4, Act 2, War of Currents WRDNCLYFFE 31 images, 1020 to 1606 memo The War of Currents, the torn contract, and the tower that never fired. After Edison, Tesla dug ditches. That is not a metaphor. He needed money. The only work available to a man with no references, no money, and an accent few New Yorkers had heard before was manual labor. He joined a crew doing electrical repairs and trenching work in Manhattan. He spent months with a shovel. Men who didn't and Oppos, know his name. Didn't and Oppos, know what was living inside his head. He saved enough to file his first patents. In 1888, he presented his AC induction motor to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers in New York. The room was full of engineers who understood exactly what they were looking at. The applause when he finished was, by contemporary accounts, sustained and unusual. Not polite, genuine. George Westinghouse was in that room. Westinghouse was a different kind of man than Edison. Where Edison was theatrical, Westinghouse was methodical. Where Edison chased publicity, Westinghouse chased precision. He understood, immediately, what Tesla and Oppos' motor meant. He offered Tesla $1 million in licensing fees, plus a royalty of $2.50 per horsepower of electricity sold using Tesla and Oppos' system. Tesla accepted, and then the war began. Thomas Edison did not take this quietly. He launched what historians now call the War of Currents, a public campaign to convince America that AC electricity was lethally dangerous. He was not wrong that AC could be dangerous. He was wrong that DC was safe. But facts were not the point. Edison and Oppos' team electrocuted animals in public demonstrations. Dogs, calves. In 1890, at the request of state officials in New York, they electrocuted a convicted murderer named William Kemmler using an AC generator, then reported in the newspapers that Kemmler had been in, quote, Westinghouse, end quote. The campaign was relentless, coordinated, and partially effective. But it gets stranger. In 1893, Tesla and Westinghouse won the contract to illuminate the Chicago World and Oppos' Fair, the Columbian Exposition. 27 million people attended. They walked through a city lit entirely by Tesla and Oppos' AC current. For many of them, it was the first time they had seen electric light. They walked through it like a dream. 2 years later, Tesla and Westinghouse built the first large-scale hydroelectric power plant at Niagara Falls. AC current from Niagara powered the city of Buffalo, New York, 26 miles away. Edison had said this was impossible. His DC system couldn't and Oppos' transmit power more than a mile without fatal loss. Tesla and Oppos' system sent it 26 miles without a problem. The war was over. Tesla had won. And then Westinghouse came to him with a problem. The financial panic of the 1890s had crippled Westinghouse Electric. The company was in debt. It might not survive. The royalty payments owed to Tesla, payments that, over a lifetime, would have totaled somewhere between $12 and $20 million, were a weight the company could no longer carry. Westinghouse sat across from Tesla. He told him the truth. He said, and quote, I need you to stay with me, end quote. Tesla looked at him. He thought about the years, the ditch digging, Poschel and Oppos' classroom, Edison and Oppos' handshake. He reached across the desk. He tore up the royalty contract. All of it. Gone. We and Oppos, Re-Getting Close to that afternoon in 1888, the moment this video has been circling. Because that decision, tearing up the contract, that was the moment. Not a single afternoon, but a lifetime of afternoons that all pointed toward this one. Tesla had the legal right to collect. He could have bankrupted Westinghouse and walked away wealthy. He chose not to. Pay attention to this, because it matters for everything that comes next. Without the royalties, Tesla and Oppos' financial security was gone. He had his patents, his reputation, and an idea so large it made the AC motor look small. He called it Wardenclyffe. On a stretch of land on Long Island, beginning in 1901, Tesla began construction on a tower, 64 meters tall, topped with a 55-ton copper dome. It was not a radio tower. It was not a broadcast antenna. Tesla and Oppo's design, if it worked, would transmit electrical power wirelessly through the Earth itself. Free electricity. For every human being, everywhere on the planet. No guayos, no mitos, no bills. J.P. Morgan, the most powerful financier in America, funded it. Then J.P. Morgan asked one question. He asked, if anyone can tune into the power Tesla is broadcasting, if it truly is free and available to everyone, where exactly do we put the meter? Tesla didn't and Oppo's have an answer for that. Because the answer was, you don't and Oppo's You can and Oppo's That was the point. Morgan cut the funding. Construction stopped. The workers left. The tower stood half-finished on Long Island for 16 years, a skeleton of what could have been, until the United States government demolished it for wartime scrap metal in 1917. Tesla watched it come down. Part 5. Act 3 Climax. Last year's Legacy 31 Images, 1618 to 2130 memo, the final years, the Supreme Court ruling, and a legacy built into the physics. He was 60 years old. He was bankrupt. He was living in the Hotel New Yorker on credit the hotel had extended out of something between respect and pity. Room 3327. That was his room at the Hotel New Yorker. He had lived there for the last decade of his life. The hotel staff knew him. They knew he ate alone. They knew he circled certain numbers, the number 3, multiples of 3, before he touched anything. They knew he would not shake hands. He walked to Bryant Park most mornings to feed the pigeons, white pigeons, which he preferred. He named some of them. He was still working. Even in those final years, Tesla was filing patents. Thinking, writing. His mind had not slowed. His body had. He was struck by a taxicab in 1937. He was 80 years old, walking apparently thinking about something else, and the injuries never fully healed. He grew thinner. He refused most food. He lived, near the end, on warm milk and honey. On the morning of January 7th, 1943, a maid knocked on the door of room 3327. No answer. She entered. Tesla was lying in his bed. He had died alone, sometime in the night. He was 86 years old. Now here is the part that should stop you. Months after Tesla died, in June of 1943, the United States Supreme Court ruled on a patent dispute that had been winding through the courts for decades. The question was simple. Who invented radio? The credit had gone to Guglielmo Marconi. Marconi had the Nobel Prize. Marconi had the fame. Marconi had the public story. The Supreme Court looked at the patents. They looked at the dates. They looked at what Tesla had published and demonstrated and filed before Marconi. They ruled that Tesla and Oppo's patents predated Marconi and Oppo's work, that the fundamental invention of radio belonged to Nikola Tesla. He had been dead for 6 months when history finally caught up with him. This is the part where we come back to the decision. The royalty contract he tore up in Westinghouse and Oppo's office. It was not naivety. It was not poor business sense. Tesla had done the calculation. He had seen, clearly, that Westinghouse and Oppo's survival meant AC power would survive, that the system would be built, that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the lights would be on everywhere, in every city, in every home, because of the infrastructure Westinghouse would build. The royalties were real money. The infrastructure was civilization. He chose civilization, and he was right. The word his rivals used, eccentric, ekintros, out of center, turned out to be exactly wrong. Tesla was not out of center. He was ahead of center. So far ahead that the center took a century to catch up. Now watch what happens next, because this is where Tesla and Oppo's story becomes your story. The device you're watching this on, whether it is a phone, a tablet, a laptop, charged last night. The electricity that charged it traveled through a grid running on alternating current. Tesla and Oppo's current. The wireless signal delivering this video to your screen works on principles of electromagnetic propagation that Tesla first described in the 1890s. If you have ever had an MRI scan, if a doctor has ever looked inside your body without cutting it open, the rotating magnetic fields that made that image possible are, at their root, Tesla and Apo's as rotating magnetic fields. The unit of magnetic flux density, the scientific measure of the force inside every electric motor, every MRI machine, every wireless charger on Earth, is called the Tesla. He is in the physics, permanently, irrevocably, in the unit itself. The man who died alone in room 3327, with $33 to his name, is inside every machine that moves on electricity. He is inside the walls of every building that has a socket. He is inside the air, in the signals, in the invisible architecture of the modern world. He wanted to go further. He wanted to send power through the earth itself, free, unlimited for everyone. The tower is gone. That dream is still waiting. But what he did give us, what he chose to give us at great personal cost, without hesitation, is so large that we are still, 80 years after his death, living inside it. The child of the midnight lightning storm. The man who drew the future in the dirt of a Budapest park. The engineer who tore up a fortune to keep the lights on. He was right about the energy. He was right about the frequency. He was right about the vibration. He was right about almost everything. Part 6. Takeaways plus OUTRO 17 images, 2149 to 2346 memo, 3 takeaways, the unbuilt dream, and the final portrait of Tesla. 3 things to take with you. First, Tesla was not vindicated by the future in some vague, poetic sense. He was vindicated specifically, legally, on the record. The Supreme Court, the Patent Office, the scientific naming conventions. History did not merely remember him. It corrected itself, in writing, and gave him what he was owed. Being right matters. It may take time, but it lands. Second, the gap between genius and impact is not intelligence. It is infrastructure, timing, and capital. Tesla had the first. He was early on the second. He never controlled the third. Every person who has ever had a correct idea that nobody funded, nobody backed, nobody believed. Tesla is your proof that the problem was not the idea. The problem was the system the idea had to move through. Third, and this is the one that stays. Tesla wanted to give every human being on Earth free electricity. He designed the machine. He built the tower. And the reason it failed was not physics. The physics worked. The reason it failed was that free power cannot be metered, cannot be sold, cannot make anyone rich. We chose the metered version. We are still choosing it. The world Tesla dreamed of, where energy is a human right, not a product, that world has never been built. Not yet. The tower is gone, but the idea is still in the ground somewhere under Long Island, waiting. One Oppos. That's the one thing about Tesla you wish more people knew. Drop it below. I read everyone. He wanted to give the world free electricity. We handed him a bankruptcy notice. He kept building anyway. That and Oppos. That's who he was. Phase 3 note. Images 123 to 130 carry no new script text. These are legacy/closing visual frames. Voice audio ends at image 122. Images 123 to 130 run on music/silence or loop the final line as needed in the video editor. Editor note for images 124 to 130, no new narration. These frames, legacy card, takeaway visuals, end card, socket close-up, the storm return, are designed to hold on music or ambient audio. Optionally echo the final line, and quote, that and Oppos. That's who he was in quote, softly over image 130 as the full circle close.